Hello guys and gals, and welcome to another episode of Skills and Abilities. Today we're going to be going over a skill which is kind of weird. It's called Eldritch Blast. And why is Eldritch Blast weird? Well, it doesn't do anything. Well, unless you fulfill the conditions, but it doesn't do anything, right? So like if you use the ability, if you use Eldritch Blast and you try and hurt things with it or do anything with it, it doesn't do anything. Like on its own. So despite the fact that it makes pretty colors and like has a little, a little effect and whatnot, it doesn't actually do anything unless you actually use it with a hex. So if you read the ability, it specifically states, blast hexed enemies with draining magical damage and refresh the duration of their active hex. This means that for it to work, you have to have a hex on the target at that particular moment for it to do any damage. Which means that this is always going to be used in conjunction with a hex at some point. It also has a relatively small radius of only like what it seems to be like 4 yards, so it doesn't even really go that far, which means it's kind of like designed for a melee character at most. You probably wouldn't want to use this on a range character because you're probably never going to be in range to actually get the Eldritch Blast to damage anything. So what hexes are there to use with Eldritch Blast since you have to use a hex? Well, the first one is Hex Bane, which has some pretty nice negative attack rating and also negative to enemy defense. And it seems to work very well to add magic damage and attack rating to your regular attack. It's a decent one, and it's not a bad option. There's also Hex Purge, which Hex Purge is a chance to basically cause little explosions to happen, which do damage to everything within range. This one in particular is kind of neat because if you use it properly, you can get tons of AOE damage, which is definitely kind of nice. And then finally, we have Hex Siphon. Hex Siphon gives you mana after a kill, life after kill, and gives you a little bit of attack rating, and it also lowers enemy damage by 33%. It seems to be more designed around survival than it is around anything else. And in general, with this particular hex, you're just really trying to survive. You just want to live. I want to live, damn it. I want to live. So let's go ahead and use a hex, and let's use an ability so that we can spread that hex. Let's just get like a really low damage weapon. Something that we can actually like not kill things with, because to see the effects of this particular ability, you kind of have to hex them and then hit them and then not kill them and so forth and so on, which, like if you're one-shotting everything, Eldritch Blast isn't going to do anything then, because at that point the monsters are already dead, they haven't been hexed, and the Eldritch Blast does nothing to monsters that are not hexed. So there's kind of like a weirdness to the way that Eldritch Blast works, because it requires a hex to be on the target. You have to hit the target. A lot of the times the target might be dead in the single hit, which means that the Eldritch Blast does nothing anyway, even if you hex the target upon hitting them, if that makes any sense. So we're going to use a lower level weapon with less damage so that we can get a good idea of how this functions. So first we're going to hex the monsters, and to hex the monsters we have to hit them, which I forgot. I took off my Raven Frost. Hold on. We can't hit the targets if we don't have any attack rating. Put the Raven Frosts. No, not the soldiers. Where's the Raven Frost? Just put 2 Raven Frosts on just so I can have like massive amounts of attack rating. And then I've got some attack rating charms in here too we can use. Let's put Mara's back on so we stop dying all the time. That would be great. It would be nice if you would stop dying. That would be amazing. And putting some points in the vitality would be nice so we can actually have some hit points. Hello. Alright, here we go. So first we're going to cleave them, and we're going to apply the hex to them. Now, to do that, you have to cast the hex. So you have to cast the hex on your weapon, which turns your weapon green, at which point you're going to attack them and cause the hex to go over their head. You can see the hex over their head in the little green fashion. Then when we use Eldritch Blast is going to apply to those hexed targets and dish out damage to them, at which point we can actually gain the effectiveness of Eldritch Blast. So the weird thing about this ability is that, number one, it doesn't do anything unless you have a hex on the target. Number two, The hex might not necessarily be on the target long enough for you to get the effectiveness of it. But one of the good things about Eldritch Blast is it does refresh the duration of any hex that it hits. So the hexes tend to last for 10 seconds according to what I've seen on the panel. So if you look right here, it says hex duration 10 seconds. Now, that means that you hex the target once within that 10-second period. Once you have hexed the target, then the Eldritch Blast can refresh the hex on the target multiple times, essentially allowing you to get multiple bonuses of the hex. You can clearly see the hex at the top of the panel reacting every time the Eldritch Blast interacts with it, causing the hex to shoot out, like its individual doojanks, which is kind of interesting. Which means that you could potentially set up an entire build around just simply applying hexes and letting Eldritch Blast and the hexes do most of the work. In fact, you could probably just use Cleave or something similar to apply hexes to a large group of monsters and then rely on Eldritch Blast and your hex to do massive amounts of damage, which could be really interesting. The Eldritch Blast ability only has 2 synergies, which isn't too bad. It's Hex Purge and Blade Warp. So if you want to max out Eldritch Blast, you're kind of forced toward Hex Purge because you're going to drop 20 points in that to get Eldritch Blast to its highest damage output. And then from there, you're going to get a massive amount of damage because you can start beefing up the skills. You can get more bonus points to Eldritch Blast, and you can increase it to much higher levels. It also has lifesteal and mana steal. Now, likewise, because the Eldritch Blast doesn't work unless the monster is cursed, Eldritch Blast does not steal life or mana from anything that is not hexed. So if you use it in a group of monsters, since it doesn't actually do any damage, you can clearly see it's not actually applying me any life or mana leech. However, if I hex the monsters, you can clearly see that I'm not taking any damage because the life leech from Eldritch Blast is working to keep my HP and my mana full. So it does work surprisingly well as a mana and life leech utility to help keep your character strong in the middle of fights. Now, if you are using melee abilities anyway, like for instance, you're utilizing Cleave or you're utilizing Mirrored Blades or you're utilizing Echoing Strike and you're applying these hexes, then it's something that you can just add into your build. It's free sustain that's going to give you some damage. One thing about the life and mana steal, though, it only applies to the damage that Eldritch Blast is doing, not your character. So Eldritch Blast damage is going to determine how much it's going to heal you and how much mana it's going to give you. So if you have a relatively poor Eldritch Blast, like for instance you only have like a 1-point wonder Eldritch Blast, then you're only going to get relatively small amounts of damage, and it's not going to give you very much life and mana leech because it's going off of that value. However, if you put in even just a minor amount of points into something like Hex Purge, you can increase the damage a little bit by increasing the synergy, and putting a couple points in can get you more and more sustain, essentially from the ability. How much you want to invest in Eldritch Blast is going to be up to you, but you can potentially get essentially a passive life and mana leech at all times if you're using any of the hex abilities. So if you're using any of these abilities, any of the 3, and you are a melee character, you can pretty much just get passive regen from Eldritch Blast. How much you get is going to be up to you depending on how much you want to use. I do think that the duration on the ability is rather low, which makes it kind of annoying to use. It only has a duration of, I think maxed out, it's like 80 seconds or something. And if you happen to have like maximum points in Psychic Ward, it goes up to 80. But it's only like 42 seconds base, which is less than a minute. So be prepared to be constantly spamming Eldritch Blast essentially all the time if you want to utilize it on your melee character. I really kind of wish that they would increase the duration a little bit more than what they did, because 42 seconds on the base side is... it's spam territory at that point. You're going to be using it all the time. And the benefit that you're getting from it isn't really going to be the most amazing. Now, even if you ignore the life leech part, ignore the damage part, it does have one additional benefit which makes it rather interesting, which is the refreshing of the hex marks. So even as a low-level ability, even if you were to just 1-point wonder the ability and utilize it as a 1-point wonder, it can still be utilized to refresh hexes. So keeping those hexes active on the target at all times, which is definitely going to help. It's definitely a weird ability, and it's something that you might want to play around with and test. I think you could totally make a character around it. In fact, a couple people within the kinship have already theory crafted like a full cleave build utilizing Eldritch Blast, which is probably going to do really well. But all in all, it's definitely an ability which you're either going to take or leave. And if you take it, you're going to try and get what utility out of it you can, either life leech and mana leech, or damage, or you're just using it to refresh your hexes. But one way or another, it could work its way into a lot of builds, even as a 1-point wonder. I think that pretty much covers everything about Eldritch Blast that you need to know. It's an odd one for sure. As always, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe button if you enjoy the content, and keep watching.